Welcome, everybody. We have, looks like about 30 participants, which is terrific. My name is Linda McGinnis, and I'm going to be the facilitator or moderator today, and we'll be doing a presentation as well. Wanted to welcome you and hope that you know that this is the transportation workshop session of the VECAN conference. And we have a really packed, wonderful session here today. But I wanted to make sure that each of you knew a bit how this is going to work. If you don't mind, I think most of you have done it, to stay on mute and take your video off. That way you can participate fully as an audience. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And if you don't mind, just so that we get to know who everybody is, if you could put your name in the chat and whatever energy committee or organization that you represent, that'll help us all get to know each other. Let's see if there's any other. The session will be recorded, so if you have to leave or if you have other friends or colleagues who want to watch it, you will have a recorded session that you can refer to, and all of the presentations will be available to you. So don't worry if you've missed a few things, because we're going to be covering a lot of ground today. So with that, I'm going to introduce to you our fabulous team of presenters. We have Dave Roberts from Drive Electric Vermont, who will be doing an overview of incentives and charging infrastructure programs with a focus on how towns can expand their charging and promote adoption. And then we have Samantha Hurt from Capstone Community Action, who will be giving an overview of a new Mileage Smart program and how to help expand access to more efficient vehicles in communities across Vermont. And then we have Jen Wood from Green Mountain Transit, who will be talking about how communities can be involved in discussions about their transit needs and how to engage with service providers and other important transit information. And then we have Sandy Bender from Local Motion, who is going to be talking about strengthening non-vehicle transportation options, including e-bikes and street diets and other sorts of things. And then if we have time at the end, I will be presenting a couple of new policy ideas that have come out recently that are paving a way towards new areas that we can be looking at in transportation, and particularly transportation equity. So the way we're going to organize it today is I'm going to start out with a transportation overview, just to give us sort of a context of transportation. And then we will move quickly to the presentations. Each presentation will be about 10 minutes. And we hope that as you have questions on each presentation, please put them in the chat. We have the wonderful Sarah Brock from Vital Communities who's keeping track of that. And we will be doing question and answer session at the end. So keep those questions going and we'll get to you at the end. Again, Nancy, if you don't mind, if you could click on the leave button, that will help you get your video off the main screen. And with that, I'm going to start a presentation on the transportation overview. Wish me luck. Okay, so the main message I hope that you come out with today in terms of the overall transportation sector in Vermont is that it presents both the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity for Vermont to reach its climate, energy, and energy equity goals. So many of you have seen this slide, but I think it's important to reiterate that Vermont has the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions in the region. And actually, even though we've been going down in those emissions, it's about 15 tons per capita. It's gone down at a much slower pace than all the rest of the region, and indeed at a much slower pace than the United States. If you look here, this is how we have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions since 2005. Yeah, since 2005 to 2016, which is the most recent data that we had for comparison purposes. And if you look at it compared to the rest of the US, we are not doing particularly well. Now, the main perpetrator in this is the transportation sector. The transportation sector is the one with the highest share of total greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont, 45% in Vermont. It represents of our total greenhouse gas emissions, and the US average is 29%. Vermonters use transportation a lot, and it is the biggest culprit in our greenhouse gas emissions. Worse than that, our greenhouse gas emissions have actually been moving in the wrong direction in transportation. If you look at us compared to all of the other states in the region, our transportation emissions have been increasing in recent years. And that's due primarily to the fact that we do a lot of driving. We're a very rural state, high vehicle miles traveled, and we have a strong appetite for bigger and bigger vehicles, SUVs and trucks. So transportation, as you know, is the key to reaching all of our climate goals, but it has had the least policy attention of all of the sectors. If you look right here, transportation has 45% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and the Paris goals are that we need to reach this level by 2025. So in the next 5 years, next 4.5 years, basically. And transportation is going to have a big role to play in all of that. If we are going to reach our 90 by 2050 goals, we're going to be needing a significant amount of reduction in the transportation sector. But really importantly for Vermont, it's important to know that transportation is also the most expensive sector for Vermonters' budgets in terms of what they spend on energy. 45% of the annual average household expenditure on energy goes to transportation, 45%. And worse, that energy burden is felt most strongly by the lowest income quintile. So if you look at this chart over here, this is the lowest income quintile, and they spend up to 20% of their household income on transportation. Can you imagine what other things they could be spending their money on besides transportation if we could figure out ways to get them into both lower cost transportation and higher mobility transportation? This is another thing that comes from the Vermont VEIC. They did a total energy burden study, and you can see that the highest energy burden is often in the most rural areas of our state. And that's where you have to have the greatest vehicle miles traveled to get to the services and the jobs that are important just to survive. So one of the basic conversations that we need to have as a state is that the transition off of fossil fuels, that we've gotten this conversation on transportation and greenhouse gas emissions and climate change backwards, that the transition for getting off of fossil fuels isn't one about economic development, or is one about economic development and affordability for Vermont. So rather than asking how much is it going to cost for us, which is important, we need to know that. We also need to ask how much can we save for individual Vermonters and for the state as a whole? And how can we get more Vermonters to be part of this transition? And that's the transportation equity conversation. So with that, I'm going to, if you need any of those slides and others, you can download a copy of the Energy Action Network progress report here. But right now I want to move on to our wonderful presenters who will give you some ideas on how we can address both the overall transportation emissions challenge and the transportation equity challenge. So Dave, I will stop sharing and move on to you. Dave, you're on mute.
There we go, 2 mute buttons. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Linda. Great to be here. I'm going to share my screen, I hope. So yes, looks like that's working. So I'm really happy to be here talking some about electric vehicles, which are just one of the many options on the agenda today. So I'm going to try to get through this fairly quickly, which means I won't dwell on the slides very long, but welcome questions and happy to follow up after today's workshop if people want to dive deeper into the details. So a little bit about Drive Electric Vermont. It's a public-private partnership coordinated by VEIC. I've been doing this work for about 8 years now and presented at many prior VECAN conferences. So missing everybody in person, but glad to be joining virtually. And we work basically on a lot of different policy and outreach programs to increase the use of EVs in the state of Vermont. So we've got a website, driveelectricvt.com. If you haven't been there and you're interested in electric vehicles, I encourage you to check that out. That's me and my Chevrolet Bolt. So a few of the reasons to go electric with your vehicle is obviously reducing emissions, because even when you factor in where your electricity is coming from and the manufacturing footprint of the vehicle, you can have very substantial greenhouse gas emission reductions as well as other harmful tailpipe pollutant emission reductions. They have great performance, so if you haven't been able to get behind the wheel of an EV, you may not know what you're missing, but the electric motors really have great acceleration and performance. So some of the fastest cars out there today are electric, and even the more basic models are a lot of fun to drive. They're super quiet, so you can have a nice conversation, listen to music. If you're on a long trip, it's just more restful. So a lot of people find that that's one of those sort of hidden benefits. You can charge them at home, so you don't need to stop at the gas station. A lot of people talk about before they get an EV that they're concerned about where they're going to be able to charge, and it turns out for most people, if you can charge at home, it's a real advantage. And we'll talk more about charging in a few minutes. And then, of course, savings. So there are incentives that I'll mention, as well as that help with the upfront purchase costs, and then there are other savings in terms of the operating costs, reduce maintenance and fuel expenses. So a lot of great reasons to make the switch. There are two basic types of plug-in vehicles. You've got all electric, powered solely by the battery. There are models now that get well over 300 miles of range on a charge before you need to plug them in. And then there are plug-in hybrid vehicles that go typically anywhere from 15 to 80 miles on the battery, but then have a gasoline engine that kicks in if you need to make a longer trip. So historically, the plug-in hybrids have been the more popular option in Vermont, but that has been changing as we start to see more of the longer range all electrics, especially the more affordable models coming into our market. Some of the more popular models that have been selling well, say in the last year or so, the Nissan Leaf is one of the most affordable all-electric options in the upper left here. And these, so the range varies for the Leaf. There's a sort of a base model, and then there's a plus model that has 225 miles of range. These are the official manufacturer range estimates, so your mileage may vary, as they say. And then these prices are before any incentives are applied. So we've got the Nissan Leaf, the Tesla Model 3. There's an all-wheel drive version of the Model 3, which is the most affordable all-wheel drive, all-electric option out there today. There's the Chevrolet Bolt. And then on the right side, we've got some plug-in hybrids, the Toyota Prius Prime, which has about a 25-mile range, but then several hundred miles if you combine the battery and gasoline operation. Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid electric is an all-wheel drive option that many people are looking for. It's about 80% of the Vermont market these days are crossovers and SUVs like the Outlander. And then the next one is the Subaru Crosstrek Hybrid. A little bit less range on the battery, but just sort of depends on your travel needs. A lot of people find they can get most of their daily travel done in the range of a plug-in hybrid and still have that flexibility. We've got on the Drive Electric website a listing of all the models that are currently available in the state. You can filter for different types of vehicles, so all electric, the range, whether it has all-wheel drive, if they're eligible for state incentives. So here is an example of what you would see if you're filtering for all electrics, getting over 200 miles of range. And if you click the little plus icon, it'll make it a little bit bigger and give you some additional information and a link to the, in this case, the Hyundai website, so you can learn more details about that specific vehicle. And some other options that I'll mention, we're going to hear more about electric bicycles from Locomotion and other non-motorized options, but those are a lot of fun. A lot of people enjoy those. There are incentives available for those. We've got some electric buses in Burlington already, and more coming to several places around the state. CarShare Vermont has a Nissan Leaf in their fleet in Burlington now. We've got electric lawn care options, and many utilities are offering incentives for both sort of home as well as commercial mowers and electric motorcycles. So a lot of different options growing all the time as the market continues to mature. Really important note for Vermonters thinking about going electric is that the cold weather will reduce range significantly. It's due to the battery technology and the need for heating typically. So we often say sort of the worst case scenarios, you might get half of the official manufacturer's range estimates on the coldest Vermont winter days. We've got a link here. I'm going to try to pull that up quickly. Yep, so that link will take you to this page, which gets into a lot more detail about the different sort of how range is impacted by temperature. So the lower temperature, the more of an impact you can expect to see. Some of the different purchasing things. So specific models may have different types of heating systems that can be more efficient in Vermont conditions. So some tips if you're in the market. And then more information about sort of range tips. So making sure that you're preheating the vehicle while it's still plugged in, maybe using heated seats or steering wheels instead of the cabin air heating systems, because those are typically not as efficient. And some links to additional resources. So for anybody who wants to make sure that they're getting as much range as possible in winter, this is a great resource that'll help you figure out what's going to work best for you. Moving on to talk a little bit about charging options. There are 3 different levels of charging. We've got more information on these on the Drive Electric website, but you can, important note, you can plug right into a standard 120 volt home outlet. You won't get much range per hour of charging. It's around 5 miles of range per hour. So for some of the longer range all electrics, it'll work, but a lot of people find that they prefer to get a level 2 charger, which is like a 240 volt, like an electric clothes dryer. That'll get you up to about 20 miles of range typically, depending on the charging equipment and the vehicle model. And many utilities are offering, either in the case of Green Mountain Power, a free home level 2 charger with an EV purchase, or some sort of rebate or incentive to help offset the cost if you buy it yourself for some of the other utilities. On the right here is a DC fast charger example, and this is not something you would use at home, but more when you're on the go. So you need to charge maybe 30 to 45 minutes. You can get an 80% charge typically with this type of equipment. It can vary depending on the vehicle and temperature, but that's sort of the rule of thumb. Important to note that most chargers for electric vehicles use the same type of plug for level 1 and level 2 charging, except for Tesla. They have their own plug style, but they have an adapter that they can use this equipment. Whereas with fast charging, Tesla has their own plug, and then there's a CHAdeMO plug for Nissan and Mitsubishi vehicles, and an SAE combo plug for basically everybody else. So there are some great maps of charging availability from PlugShare and other sources that you can filter to just show those locations that are going to be compatible with your vehicle. We've got about 260 charging stations in Vermont today, and about 30 of those are the orange fast charging locations. And you can see part of a growing network in the region beyond. Tesla really has figured out the fast charging infrastructure much better than other automakers. So these red dots are existing Tesla fast charging locations. They go all across the country and beyond. But important to note that they are only for Tesla vehicles. But super convenient. Anybody who's doing longer distance travel in an all-electric vehicle would be probably well served to take a look at Tesla. Also wanted to mention some of the future plans for fast charging in Vermont. So these green locations are locations that have been funded through the state's Volkswagen diesel settlement. And the state is currently in the contracting process with a company that's hopefully that contract will be signed soon, and that company will be building these out in the next 1 to 2 years. So there's be 11 more locations offering both types of plugs, and at least two cars can charge at the same time at all of these green locations is the plan. And there are some other fast charging plans, and I'm happy to talk more about that. Moving right along though, purchase incentives. So 3 basic types of purchase incentives. There's a federal tax credit. It's up to $7,500 based on the battery size of the vehicle. Does begin to sunset as manufacturers hit 200,000 sales, which Tesla and General Motors have phased out of their tax credit availability, but other automakers still have a ways to go. Nissan will be next and have at least a year before they're likely to hit that threshold. And it is possible that Congress could take action to renew this in the interim. So we'll have to see what happens with the new administration. The tax credit is something that you claim on it, your income taxes, unless you're leasing, in which case the leasing company gets the tax credit and will typically pass it through. It doesn't carry over into future years, so you need to make sure that you have enough tax liability to get the full benefit in the year that you buy the vehicle. There's now state of Vermont EV incentives, which are up to $4,000 depending on your income and the type of EV. There's some additional funding added in November. It's currently, there was 950,000 added, and right now there's about $825,000 remaining. So act now if you're interested in taking advantage of that. There is a vehicle price cap, so it's only available for vehicles with a price starting under $40,000, and it's distributed in partnership with the electric utilities. So you actually send your incentive application to your utility, and they get reimbursed by the state. You can also take advantage of it by going to one of the dealers that are participating in the program, and they'll pass it through to you at the time of sale. If you're not doing that, you need to make sure that you get a pre-approval before you make your purchase. And there's more information on the Drive Electric website linked here on how to go about that. And then basically every electric utility in the state is offering some type of EV incentive for purchase. Typically, all these incentives that I'm talking about, the federal tax credit and the state of Vermont incentive, are only on new electric vehicle purchases. We'll be hearing more about the Mileage Smart program from Capstone, funded by the state, that includes some eligibility for used EV purchases. The electric utility programs are for new, and then many of them also have somewhat lower incentives for used EV purchases. So as I say, there's a lot more information on this Drive Electric page resource. Unfortunately, I don't have time to get into all the intricacies, but if there are questions, I'll look forward to following up on those in the discussion. And this is just an example of how all these incentives can potentially be combined for Nissan Leaf here. If you're eligible for sort of the standard incentive amounts, you might be looking at going from a $31,000 vehicle to a $14,000 vehicle with the federal tax credit, the standard state incentive, automaker discounts that are available, and a utility incentive. There are typically higher incentives for lower income Vermonters. The state incentive, for example, goes from $2,500 to $4,000, and the utility incentives often have an additional amount as well, so you can save even more money, but that does assume that you'd be eligible to take advantage of that federal tax credit, which a lot of lower income folks may not have that tax liability. So they might want to think about leasing or other options. So you could see it's actually, even today with all these incentives, you can find EVs are much more affordable than a gasoline vehicle purchase.
Dave,
Yeah.
need to have you wrap up so we can get to the others. Thank you.
Yep. I just have 2 more slides, I think. Wanted to mention there's an ACCD resource for community regulation. So if you're on a planning commission or anything like that, this is a great resource. Happy to talk more about this. It's linked here on the slide. There are building energy code requirements for EV charging. So if there are new developments going in that are subject to Act 250, this will often apply, and some municipalities are also adopting more stringent, what are called stretch code requirements. So we can talk more about that if there's interest. And then just kind of keeping in mind some basic points for energy committee type of work. You know, home charging is really important. Getting it done at the time new housing is being built is the most cost-effective way to do it. So it's really important. And then thinking about options for fleet vehicles, there are some communities that are doing that. thinking about ways to streamline charging options for municipal employees or public charging, and then of course helping spread the word with outreach. So maybe hopefully in the future we'll have opportunities for more events and things like that. So a lot of energy committees have been involved in that type of work in the past. So thanks everybody, and sorry if I'm running a little bit over. I think you're muted, Linda, or not hearing.
Sorry. Now we can move on to, is it who's next? Need to check and see. Yeah, so we're moving on to Samantha. So Samantha from Capstone is next to talk about the Mileage Smart program. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Linda and Dave. Okay, can everyone see this and hear me? Okay, so Linda did a wonderful job explaining how transportation can be extremely inaffordable for low-income Vermonters. And Mileage Smart is a wonderful option for people to use. Say if they're stuck in an old clunker, they don't have access to public transportation, and they just need another option. So this program is here to help low to moderate income Vermonters get into a cleaner vehicle and ultimately save more money down the road. So Mileage Smart offers 25% up to $5,000 off of a used high MPG vehicle, and this is for qualifying participants. And the goal of this incentive is to help make cleaner transportation more accessible for low to moderate income Vermonters. And now more than ever, we're seeing that we need to support Vermont's workforce. And for folks who don't have that easy access, this is a clean and affordable alternative. So as of right now, we have about $715,000 remaining. We were initially given $750,000, so we have quite a bit left to work with. And this program is statewide. It's not restricted to Capstone's service area. So how it works, this program process is relatively simple. The interested buyer fills out our online application, and if they're eligible, they can start looking for cars. Once they find a car that meets their requirement, if they are going to end up needing a loan, which most of our participants do, they just get pre-approved at a Vermont-based lending institution. And once those two pieces of the puzzle are set up, the incentive is applied to the purchase, and they can drive home in their new used efficient vehicle. So a little bit about the process. In order to qualify for the program, participants must be at least 18 years old. They must not be a dependent. They can either be employed on disability or over 60 years old. They must have either a valid Vermont driver's license or proof of residence. And the last piece is they must meet the income requirements. So here is the household income qualification schedule. It is broken up by county. Chittenden, Franklin, Grand Isle are different than the rest of the state. As long as each individual's household is either at or below these numbers, they will qualify. So vehicle qualifications, because EVs are a little bit more expensive up front, and a lot of these folks aren't able to have access to new vehicles, this program does open up to different types of cars. We have electric vehicles, hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and some gas vehicles eligible. So as long as they have at least 40 MPG combined, the car is eligible, and then it must be purchased from a Vermont dealer. It must be priced at or below the NADA clean retail value. And lastly, this program is only eligible for primary vehicle purchases. So this does work for folks who are stuck in an unreliable clunker, and they've been trying to find a way to get into a new vehicle. So the people who have been using this incentive. Most of them have been able to trade in their old cars. And then also for folks who don't even have that first step of transportation, quite a few, this has been their first vehicle purchase. So lenders, we do not work directly with specific lenders. However, there are lenders who offer discounted rates. The ones you see on the screen are those. And then the only requirements we have for this program is that each lender has a brick and mortar location in Vermont, and the APR must not exceed 12%. So what's next? As I mentioned, we have about $715,000 left in this program. It was first started earlier this year, but due to COVID, we kind of had to set it on the back burner. So we relaunched about a month ago. And since then, we've been able to deliver 10 vehicles. Our goal is 250. So to be at that range, we need to be doing quite a bit of outreach. So if anyone is interested in helping spread the word, or if you know someone who would be eligible for the program and interested, please share information. We're on Facebook at Mileage Smart, and we're also interested in working with energy committees to help spread the word. So if you're interested, you can just notify us in the comment or in the chat in the webinar. And then also here's my contact information as well.
Great, thank you. We appreciate that. And now we'd like to move on to, just so that people, if you joined a little bit late, if you have any questions on these programs, please put them in the chat and we'll get to all of them at the end in the Q&A session. So now I'd like to go to Jen Wood from Green Mountain Transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Hi, everybody. Sorry we're not in person, but I really appreciate everybody taking the time to talk about transportation when I know schedules are hectic and the world's a little crazy. So thank you so much for taking the time today. So I'm Jen Wood. I'm the Public Affairs and Community Relations Manager for Green Mountain Transit. I'm going to share slides in a minute, but after years in kind of the energy efficiency, low-income weatherization, renewable energy market, wanted to dabble in transportation for the very reasons that Linda talked about in terms of it's our biggest greenhouse gas impact and the biggest energy burden for Vermonters. And at Green Mountain Transit, I work with the rural towns. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen. There you go. It's a beautiful picture of the Green Mountains and Lake Champlain. That also is another reason to keep fighting for this. So let's see. I'm going to start sharing my slides. And here is just a quick list. I'm not going to read through it, but I'm going to go high level through all of these initiatives and then look forward to kind of further conversations today and then down the road as we engage further. So just quickly about GMT, we are technically a municipality and we're the first and only transit authority in Vermont. And on the map here, you can see highlighted in green the areas that we serve and the counties that we serve. And also kind of those little pop-outs to look at or talk about the services that we provide: fixed route service, local commuter routes, paratransit services. We have school tripper or neighborhood specials service, which is school students and regular riders mingled together, and shopping shuttles and many more. GMT represents about 50% of all public transit ridership in Vermont, with the rest being serviced by 7 other transit agencies that cover the remainder of Vermont. And as I'm sure you can imagine, much of that is in Chittenden County. But again, as I noted, my work is really with the rural service areas, about 50 towns or all of those towns outside of Chittenden County. And I just wanted to call people's attention. So this is a screenshot of our homepage. And so we have software on the buses where they're tracked real time. So those little icons are the buses and where they are or where they were at that moment when I took the snapshot. And there's also an app, which you can see on the bottom right-hand corner. The transit app is a way that you can real time see where your bus is, which is particularly handy coming into the cold months when you might not want to wait outside. So, so I want to talk about just different projects that are going on and ways in which community energy committees can engage with public transportation. So as I said, I work with the rural towns and work with all the select boards. And just briefly, not going into all the details, but the way the funding works for GMT is whether in the urban or rural area, we get 80% of our funds, and then we're required to get a 20% local match. And that's supposed to mostly come from the towns, but also fair revenue and private contributions, like, you know, in say ski towns, the resorts and other businesses contribute towards that service. And so in the urban area, the way it works is towns are actually member towns. So they're required through the power of taxation to contribute their what we call fair share. And it's a calculation that we do for all towns based on census data and a number of other factors that sort of says Burlington or Cabot, or no matter what town you are, here's what your fair share is. But then on the rural side, it's not enforced in any way in terms of the power of taxation, but it's just, you know, me or this position in the past going to each town and following their various requirements that are normally required for a nonprofit, even though we're now a municipality, whether it's petitioning, going to the select board meetings, and providing a funding request. But one of the challenges that GMT has had is that we've never gotten sort of the full 20% contribution. But I mentioned this sort of select board activity because it's a way in which energy committees or energy and transportation committees, can get engaged, because when your transit provider is there presenting, because the select board has the authority to either automatically integrate those funds for transit into the budget or to bring it to town meeting day. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as an example with Northfield and how they've engaged in this topic. So the next exciting pilot or idea that I want to share with you, you may have heard it referred to as microtransit. It's now being called My Ride by GMT. And it's a pilot that's starting in Montpelier in mid-January. And basically, if anybody's familiar with our routes there, we have 3 circulator routes, sort of fixed 3 routes in and around Montpelier, and those are going to go away. And in place of that is going to be an on-demand Uber-esque microtransit, My Ride by GMT project, where instead of, I think there's about a 7.5-mile radius around Montpelier. So anywhere in that bubble, you can get a ride from door to door, essentially, versus just on that fixed route. And one of the exciting pieces that's connected to the next project that I'm going to share is, you know, breaking down some of the barriers around this. Integrates choice riders, what we call choice riders, with somebody getting service through Medicaid, and the software allows us to kind of track that. And so for people that don't have a smartphone or access to the internet, you can still call into our call center and request a ride and get hooked up with a ride that way. Or there's going to be an app which will look a lot like Uber that'll track your route. It'll show you the vehicle that's coming and the license plate, and they will be eventually electric. We have some smaller kind of van and what we call cutaway buses coming that are going to be electric, so they will be integrated into this, but farther down the project. And this is a 2-year pilot, and I know there's a lot of towns all around Vermont that are really eager to see, you know, if this works for them, how it's going to work for others moving forward, other towns. So the next exciting initiative is the future of rural transit, which I have had the privilege of working with an incredible group of women from a number of agencies that are part of the kind of the core team, from the Energy Action Network, Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, Vermont Energy Education Program, and Vermont Clean Cities. And then we have a much broader stakeholder team, of which, you know, folks here are welcome to kind of become part of, which is, you know, includes AARP and VCIL and Green Mountain Power and a whole list of others that I'm not going to go through the list right now, but a very diverse group of people interested in the idea, which is essentially to integrate public transit and school transit and do so on electric public transit buses, as opposed to electric school buses. And so, as I noted in my previous slide, this sort of microtransit, My Ride, helps, you know, alleviate or look into and break down some of the barriers around integrating different types of riders, and at least now the costs that are associated with it. And this project was pitched at the EAN Summit in the fall, and so we were one of the pitches selected to move forward. You know, and this is a conversation that's been going on a long time, but it's really exciting to see kind of renewed momentum and excitement around it. And so we also just were awarded a MTI grant through VTrans. So it's great that VTrans is supportive of this idea. And essentially, we're going to use those initial funds and resources to look at the My Ride by GMT and evaluate that. Also look at the Burlington School Trippers program, which has been integrating school students, riders, and regular riders for many years now, and then you know, and sort of evaluate what worked and what didn't work. And even though Burlington is not rural, we can still glean some insights. And then we're going to be looking for 1 to 2 pilot communities to work with the school and the town and lots of other partners to try to pilot this. And, in terms of expanding transit to all of Vermont, we know the school buses reach pretty much every dirt road. So we're excited about this, and there will be, we're actually putting together right now the criteria for what the pilot projects in the towns and the schools would need sort of to be part of the project. But we're not going to sort of leave anybody out. We're still going to keep people apprised because we want, to keep the support, but we're going to test out a couple. And then, so Fare Free is another big initiative. And as you'll see, this is not a GMT slide, it's a Sustainable Transportation Vermont slide. This was also part of another pitch that was at the EAN Summit to push the state to adopt Fare Free. And so GMT is kind of having its own internal discussion and with the board and the leadership, and there isn't any sort of definitive determination there as far as where that's going to go. That we actually have a consultant looking at kind of all of the parameters around what would that look like, what would that entail from financial to all the things to be considered. But right now, all of the state is fare free thanks to CARES Act funds. So as one of the initial safety measures for COVID, we instituted Fare Free to sort of minimize that interaction with the driver. And so this conversation is, poised to come up in the upcoming session to talk about, pushing the state once the Fare Free goes away, which is anticipated to be covered through the CARES Act funds through the end of this fiscal year, which ends June 2021. So the idea being, let's not go back. Let's keep Fare Free and then move forward, because we not only have to have Fare Free, but ultimately there's lots of areas that still need transit, which could be part of that future of rural transit pitch. And then two other, sorry, I'm trying to go quick here. So that Northfield, as I mentioned earlier, is they've been doing some incredible work. And what I think the big piece is, that they have, the lesson I want to call out is they've integrated their energy committee and transportation committee and kind of pulled it together. And what they found is that they've got a more diverse group of people engaging in the process. And so, people that ride the bus to and from Montpelier that probably wouldn't have ever participated in an energy efficiency committee are coming to the table. And so they have more people working together on both of these issues, which are interconnected. And so some of the images here is this bus to work initiative that they did some time back, obviously pre-COVID, where they had, they kind of engaged people to come together. They had resources in the library. And then the other is a look at the transportation fair that they hosted, from everything from EVs to Go Vermont to public transit, and to just create awareness. But again, the key factor is that they integrated these two kind of subject areas and have brought more people to the table. And as I mentioned with the select board comment, their select board a couple of years ago had pulled out, kind of sneakily pulled out the funds for their public transit that was supposed to go to GMT, which could have meant their service going away. And they came together, advocated, and actually had a ballot, Australian ballot on the floor of town meeting day to make sure that the funds went back in. So it was an incredible kind of collective effort to show the voice of that public transit is important to that community. And lastly, I just want to make sure people are aware of this transportation toolkit for town volunteers and energy committees created by Bethany Fleischman at Vital Communities. And it's really just a living document open to be modified. It was created pre-COVID, but it's just sort of a starting point. And she's really excited to hear feedback, comments, ways in which it could be expanded. And she's interested also in kind of diving deeper into have the transportation equity lens become part of that. So I don't know if folks are aware of that, but I'm sure the link is here, and I'm sure it'll be sent out as part of the follow-up. But anyway, thank you again. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and
all right. Jen, really appreciate that. And everybody's doing great at holding to the times. We have our next presenter, who is Sandy Bender from Local Motion, and I'll just hand it off to you. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So I alluded to.
You're on mute, Sandy.
I am unmuted. Yeah. Okay. It just took a minute to catch up with me. So as Dave alluded to a little earlier, I will be talking about e-bikes as an additional alternative transportation option. And specifically, I will be talking about a program that Local Motion offers called the Local Motion Traveling E-Bike Lending Library. So I will pull up my screen now. Okay, so I am program coordinator at Local Motion. We are a statewide advocacy group for biking and walking. And my role involves several different aspects, but what I'm talking about today is one of my primary roles there. And it's the thing that I'm most passionate about, or one of the things I'm most passionate about in my work, is our e-bike lending library opportunities. So what do e-bikes provide? Just a really quick highlight the big things that you think about when you're thinking about e-bikes. They allow you for further range of travel compared to what you might call an analog or a standard bike, a non-electric bike. It also increases the accessibility that people have to biking in general and biking distances, as well as lowering emissions if you are using an e-bike as a replacement to a traditional car, especially single occupancy vehicles. So the Traveling E-Bike Lending Library is a local motion program that's funded by VECAN's their Go Vermont program. And thanks to this funding and how everything works, the program is free to both the host site and free to the users who borrow the e-bikes. And I'll get into a little bit more detail of what it looks like and how that works. As the name implies, this is a program that travels around the state of Vermont, and it's entering into its third year. Although the second year of 2020, it was a little bit disrupted, so it looked slightly different. But the pilot year in 2019 was a very successful program. And the goal of this program is to provide borrowers with an opportunity to test out an e-bike and how it can, or in some cases, how it doesn't fit into their life. E-bikes, while not quite as much of an investment as a car, especially any sort of car, electric or non-electric, they are a bit pricier than your standard transportation bicycle. And so this program, the goal is to allow people to see how it might be used, what style would be best for them before they make any sort of financial investment. And this way they can be a little bit more confident going into that it will work for their lives or their family's lives. So how this program works. Local Motion provides the host site or the host organization with the e-bikes and a lot of the back end support to make this program run. So what host organizations in the past have been a pretty broad range of different organizations. We've worked with public libraries, we've worked with energy committees, we've worked with towns directly, we've worked with bike shops. So the size and shape can vary. It's pretty versatile. I'll go over some of the specifications of what a host organization needs, but in general, we like to work with any group of dedicated people who are interested in hosting this program for their community. So how it works once we've decided on what the host organization will be, the host has the e-bikes for 4 to 6 weeks, and that's kind of variable. We don't like to do for much shorter than 4 weeks because anything shorter, it kind of limits the number of people who will be able to test out these e-bikes, and that just seems to be the sweet spot for hosts holding onto those bikes. So during that period, community members will sign up to borrow one of the choices of e-bikes, and generally we have at least a commuter style bike and a cargo style bike available, both with e-assist, pedal assist. And so borrowers can sign up on a predetermined schedule that the host site and Local Motion work together to create. And then in addition to having these multi-day loan periods, so this schedule will look like anything from borrowers taking a bike for one night, so 2 days, 1 night, upwards of they can borrow it for 5 days at a time. And that schedule can be very flexible. It's about what the host site thinks works best for the volunteers, for their schedule. A lot of factors can go into it. In addition to having multi-day loans as an option, the host can also offer what we call demo days. And so this would be you take the fleet on, say it's a Saturday, and people can sign up. During COVID times, we had everyone pre-register, but this can be flexible depending on where the world is at when the host site is borrowing the lending library. So people can either sign up in advance for a 1-hour demo slot, or they can show up and it can just be an open and invited engaging community event. So this will allow the host to be able to reach more people than they can do just with the multi-day loans. So if you're interested in hosting the lending library, you being an energy committee, a town, an individual who wants to find a host organization within their community, things to be aware of. The host site will need indoor overnight bike storage. So enough space for cargo bikes, especially. E-bikes in general tend to be a little bit larger and a little bit heavier than your typical standard bike without e-assist. And then the cargo bikes just amplify that as well. The host site will provide on-the-ground coordination for the actual picking up and dropping off that each borrower does at the beginning and end of their loan periods. The host site will also be in charge of monitoring the e-bikes for maintenance and repair needs, although Local Motion covers the cost of all repairs, and as needed and as makes sense, we provide the repair coordination depending on where you are located and who we agree to kind of contract with to do the bike repairs. Well, we work together to just make it happen, make it as easy as possible. And it's not often that bikes need repairs and maintenance gets done before they're sent around, but it's just something to keep in mind. The host location must also have liability insurance. So Local Motion provides insurance to cover the e-bikes, but there's just that standard, a borrower is on your property, so there must be some sort of liability insurance as well. So Local Motion provides all the e-bikes and accessories. We will bring the bikes to you and pick them up on pre-arranged days, depending on what dates the host will be keeping the bikes for. We provide the reservation software and schedule setup. So if you decide to become a host organization and you're interested in hosting this program, I work with you to create whatever schedule best fits your needs. So that can be 2 days on, 1 day off. It can be, hey, I want to do every day, but not Sundays. Basically anything that fits into you being the host organization schedule, we can make it work. So we'll have everything set up and running. So as the host organization, you just need to handle the specifics of time and place where the person will be picking up the bike. Like I said, the insurance on the bikes is covered by Local Motion. And then we handle all of the post-loan communication. So we do surveys, follow-ups, anything that you want to send out to the entire group of people, we can set up in our email system and send it out to everyone who needs to see it. Here's some information. If you're interested in hosting, you can head to our localmotion.org/traveling e-bikes. There's a getting started guide on there, which goes over a lot of the information that I just talked about with just some additional requirements and information that you might be looking for. And then there's a form, the I'm interested in hosting form. And it's just it's a quick way for me to have a better understanding of who the host organization is, where the site would be located, why you're interested, and then some contact information. And I can reach out to you and we can schedule time from there. As of right now, the 2021 lending library has, I think, 3. As of the start of this presentation, it had 3 open slots available in the year. But this program is likely to keep going. It's been very successful for the years that it has been running. So if you're interested in even just thinking about this for the future, now's a good time to get an idea of what your host organization might look like, what the host site might look like, or what you need to do to prepare to host this program going forward. And just to give you a quick overview of how 2019 went, that was the first year that we ran this program, and we went to 6 different sites throughout the year, and we stayed mostly in bigger cities, but this year I'm hoping to move into some of those more rural communities, and several of the towns that we've already scheduled with are a little bit more rural than Montpelier, Middlebury, the places that we went in 2019. And that is providing a really great opportunity for that connection between, okay, we have higher emissions coming from rural areas because there are more transportation needs, and here's an option that really extends the range of working in conjunction with public transportation or as a solo transportation option. So all that is to say that we are happy to bring and hoping to bring this traveling lending library program across the state and to reach every community that we can, no matter the size. There's no benefit to having a larger city versus a smaller town. We want everyone who is interested in being able to try out an e-bike to have that option to try out an e-bike. So if you have any further questions about this program specifically, please reach out to me either via email or on this website. And then just as a little addition success story that I like to share, in 2019, one of the two of the locations that the Traveling Lending Library went was to the Upper Valley area. And then a group of volunteers in the Upper Valley decided that they thought this program was so successful and had so much potential that they kind of formed their collective powers and came to local motion to set up a specific lending library that now resides in the Upper Valley Lending Library. 2020 was the first year that it ran, and of the 6 towns that were involved in this, everyone did such a phenomenal job that it basically repeated what they were able to do with the Traveling and Lending Library, but on a larger scale. So the idea for this program is to bring you an example of this and then show as well that if you are interested in helping provide community members with the option for e-bikes, there are other options to keep going even after the Traveling Lending Library has left. And that's just a fun success story that I like to share. Yeah, if you have any further questions, please let me know. And especially if you're interested in hosting for 2021, I'd be more than happy to go into more of the details for you.
Thank you, Sandy. That was a
You're very welcome.
And for those of you who are following, you can look in the chat to see what the questions and a number of great answers coming from several of our presenters are also in the chat. And keep the questions coming. I'm going to give you a quick overview of one new policy proposal that's come in. Several have already been covered, so I won't cover them. And then we'll get to questions and answers. So thank you, everyone. Just one more here that I think you'll be interested in. So as Jen Wood shared with us earlier, EAN at its summit had policy pitch proposals, and a couple of them were voted on as ones that really needed to move ahead. That are trying to address transportation equity. She covered the one that was about the future of rural transit, and the one that I'd like to give you some background on is another one called Replace Your Ride. And Replace Your Ride has a goal of helping low-income Vermonters switch to clean transportation options affordably and to accelerate greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So what it does is to offer, and it's built off of a very successful California program, which is doing much of the same thing, and is built into some of the new proposals that are coming about from the Biden administration and Chuck Schumer in New York. What the proposal is to offer cash incentives to low and middle income Vermonters to replace to scrap their older high polluting vehicle. And that is defined as the year 2010 or earlier. And it can be defined in a number of different ways, but that's how it's generally defined right now. And to use that incentive to choose from a range of clean energy transportation or shared mobility options. And that would be a newer used EV, transit vouchers, shared mobility vouchers, electric motorcycles and bicycles. And this would be building off of some of the early ideas coming out of Mileage Smart, the low income incentive program at the state level for purchase of new EVs. So it's building off of the existing successes that we currently have in Vermont and learning lessons from those. The importance of this is that oftentimes, if you're a low-income person, you're told that you only have one choice of things that are available to you. This would give low and middle-income Vermonters an opportunity to choose to either switch to a cleaner vehicle or to go car-free entirely, and could help support those many of the programs that you just saw presented today. And just to give you an order of magnitude of what we're talking about, those vehicles, there was a question earlier about heavy freight, which I think Dave Roberts answered in the text, but about 94% of the on-road vehicles in Vermont are automobiles, and that's 71%, or trucks, and that's 23%. And 43% of those are the model year 2010 or earlier. And then 28% are model years 2005 to 2010. Now, What that means is that there's a lot of vehicles that are older vehicles and that are polluting significantly more. This is from the EPA to show you and the summary is over here on the left, that if you were to trade out a model vehicle from 2005, a model year vehicle 2005, that was a gas vehicle, for an average new vehicle now, that gas vehicle had 2.9 times the pollution of a vehicle that you could purchase today, and a diesel vehicle would have 10 times the average vehicle that you have today. From 2010, you see that it's twice and 5 times as much. And if you're trading those out for an electric vehicle, the greenhouse gas emission reduction is actually quite high. And if you're targeting it to low-income people, you're helping them to stack those incentives. And I'll go back to an earlier page here. In Replace Your Ride, the additional incentive that we would talk about would be about $3,000, maybe $4,000. As in California, it's $9,000. And if you add that to the existing federal, state, and utility incentives, it would bring the cost of a new EV down quite low to around $8,000 to $10,000, depending on the type of vehicle that you're purchasing. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that this was another important policy that's being discussed in the state legislature right now. I think we still have Senator Andy Perchlik online, and stop sharing this. Who has been helpful in thinking this through, as has Molly Burke and a number of other people on the House Transportation Committee, along with a number of other transportation programs that they're trying to put into the T-bill this year, specifically with a title of climate transportation initiatives. So with that, I'd like to now bring all of our presenters back on, if you wouldn't mind, if you could turn on your video and audio, and see if we can get to, I think Nancy Fazy and Mary Andrews, if you wouldn't mind clicking on the leave button in the top right-hand corner of your screen, then we could have just the presenters on the screen. Thank you very much. So there are a number of questions that I think primarily were answered in the chat, but I think it might be useful to have them answered for everyone to hear in case people didn't see it in the chat. And if anyone else has questions, please write them in the side. One of the questions I just mentioned just now was the heavy freight question, which is, are any people at the state level looking at the impact of heavy freight vehicles in Vermont? So Dave, if you want to just give a brief update on that.
Sure. So there are some things that I mentioned in the chat. There is the Vermont Clean Cities Coalition works with fleets to reduce their petroleum emissions and move to alternative fuel vehicles. So they've worked with a number of fleets across the state. There's more information on their website. The governor did sign on to a multi-state agreement to basically get to zero emission trucks and buses over the next, many years. Right now, there aren't a lot of options. There are a few, but not many for zero emission trucks and buses. So the idea is that states coming together to support that will hopefully drive manufacturers to produce more and bring costs down. So there are still some challenges in this sector, but there is work underway. The state's also investing a large portion of the Volkswagen diesel settlement funds in electric buses, and just wrapped up a solicitation for some other proposed types of electric vehicle options. And I did also mention the Vermont Climate Council coming out of the Global Warming Solutions Act. I would imagine that part of their climate action plan development will include consideration for this segment of the transportation system. So.
Thank you, Dave. Another question that was really important that came up earlier in the conversation with your presentation was related to fast chargers, and that's still one of the things that keeps people from moving to electric vehicles because there aren't enough fast chargers around the state, and why aren't they being installed on interstate corridors? So if you could share the answer that you gave earlier, just to make sure everybody's heard it.
Sure. So many of the locations actually are on interstate corridors. They're not at rest areas because there are some regulatory issues with that. And it's also many times the welcome centers or rest areas, if you want to call them that, are they don't have access to the high powered electric grid connections that are necessary to support fast charging. So there are some issues there, but generally speaking, you know, a number of locations along interstate corridors should be coming along in the next, hopefully, year, assuming that all goes according to plan. The state is in a position to invest another, I think, 750,000 beyond what I was showing on the map earlier, the 11 additional locations. So there should be some more sort of filling in gaps, adding more redundancy. And I think the state is actually hoping to do some sort of RFP, request for proposal type solicitation, to get companies to bid on putting in more of that charging early in the new year. So more coming on that. And one of the reasons that not everything is on the interstate system is the state does have a goal to getting fast charging within 30 miles of basically any location in the state. So there are, of course, many locations that are more than 30 miles from interstate. So, you know, need to make sure that we're covering all of the state.
Add that I was on a call last week with the federal delegation, and there is a significant push in the new Biden administration for increasing fast charging along major corridors as well. So we're hoping to find some federal funding for that as well. Hanif, you asked about replace your ride, trading out for an I'll read it, trading out for an e-bike or an e-motorcycle would be a huge emission saving. Could you quantify? You're absolutely right. It would be a huge emission saving, and that's why we wanted to offer replace your ride to people who would like to switch out an old vehicle to go vehicle free. I just wanted to make sure you knew that organizations like Local Motion, like CarShare Vermont, the Vermont Auto Dealers Association are all part of the team that's thinking this through. And Energy Action Network is actually, they put out an annual report that many of you are familiar with, that calculates what are the things that we need to reach our goals. And one of the main things that we're calculating right now is what would be the emission savings if something, if we were able to get a large portion of our older vehicles off the road. And we need to figure out how many we would imagine going to other vehicles and how many we would imagine going to bicycles. But yes, it would go from basically a lot to zero if you switch to a bike. So that's a really strong reason to go car free. We have another question, which is from Eliza, which is that, or Elisa. She says, we are interested in the electric school bus pilot program and how that is going, as we would like them in our school district. I'm not sure if you're referring on that to the VW settlement pilot program or what Jen Wood had talked about in the future of rural transit. So I'll turn it over to Jen right now to talk about what are the possibilities of moving forward with the future of rural transit, and then Dave can answer on the pilot, the VW pilot. Oh.
All right, and looks like she just said VW settlement. So I'll pass it to Dave in a second. But yeah, in terms of our project, it's really focused on electric public transit buses. But I know there are a number of initiatives on electric school buses. So I will toss it to Dave for that one.
Sure. So some of my colleagues here at VIC are supporting the state in that pilot program, the VW pilot, which includes Barrie Unified School District, Champlain Valley Union, Franklin West, for school buses, and then Marble Valley Regional Transit for public transit in Rutland area. So those projects are coming along. I think that they are just, if they haven't already, they're just about to select the vendor. So they went through a whole sort of RFP process to make sure that they're getting the best deal for buses that are going to meet their needs. I don't think they've announced the selected bidders yet, but expect that will be happening pretty soon. It is going to take a while for the buses to actually get, you know, produced and on the road here. So I don't know the exact time frame, but it's probably going to be a while yet, unfortunately. But there is progress being made. And there is on the Vermont A&R website, I expect they'll have some updates there as this moves forward.
I'd also add that in the Replace Your Ride program that Jen presented, the idea is to actually have a single bus that serves both schools and all other services, and that bus be electric. And so that's an idea that is in its nascent stage, but there's a significant amount of interest in that. There's another question on tracking EV registration, Dave, from Jeffrey Gephardt. I think Dave has a lot of information on that, so I'll hand it out to him.
Yep. So you do recall correctly, the state does track EV registrations. We post that information on the Drive Electric Vermont website. The latest data available right now is April 2020. Things are a little bit behind because of COVID and other priorities at the state, but we should be updating that soon. There is actually, for Town Energy Committee use and sort of measuring over time, Efficiency Vermont produces reports for regional planning commissions that include town by town estimates of energy use, and it includes data from the state EV registration tracking. So if you haven't seen that, that's a great place to look. It is just annual updates, but for a lot of use cases, that's probably adequate. So I can try to follow up if you're interested in getting access to that information.
Eliza, good. I'm glad you're interested in the Future of Rural Transit project. I work on that one too, and it's exciting. Question for Sandy, Locomotion Upper Valley. Any advice on potential startup funding for e-bike lending libraries or in extending possibilities for use in the VW settlement?
I would say that the success that we've seen for a startup e-bike lending library has been very grassroots crowdfunded for the initial go around. And there are some smaller grants that I've seen in the past, none that come to mind that apply to this directly. But yeah, the way that the Upper Valley Lending Library funded the initial, basically the initial everything to start up their program was through crowdsourcing, through those 6 or plus towns and surrounding areas, just people from energy committees and residents who were passionate about this type of thing, pooled resources, asked for donations, and that's how it started. Beyond that, this is something that I'm looking into, so I would be happy to share this as I come up with more information about what sorts of smaller, maybe more local grants are available for people to be starting this type of program. And my guess is that as this sort of program, be it with e-bikes or anything else that is a carbon emission reduction lending program for people to have trial runs, as that type of thing becomes more popular, there will be more opportunities arising. But as of right now, the most success I've seen is the grassroots crowdfunding.
Great. So thank you everyone for participating. Thank you for all the work that you do at the local level. I know how hard it can be in an energy committee. I've been on one myself for many years. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all the presenters for doing the awesome work that you're doing in each of your respective programs. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you, VECAN, for helping to put this on.